hate crime and anti-Semitic hate crime that we've had and the work that we're doing to combat that. But I want to take this moment during Ramadan to talk about the positives that we get from our Muslim community, because, you know, in Ramadan, the average, the Muslim population gives to charity £700 a month, £700 during Ramadan. It's incredible that they're able to give that much of charity. And also, when you look at our public services and the contribution that is made, whether it's in our health system, our education system, in our local government, in all of our public services, we get an incredible amount from our Muslim community. And we couldn't be prouder, as Nick said, in her.
Rayner exposed. Angela Rayner receives attack from Victoria Starmer about her affairs with Starmer. Business is facing a serious threat under Rachel Rayner's proposed employment rights bill, a measure that critics argue will decimate confidence and push many employers to leave the UK. Despite widespread concern, Labour remains determined to push the bill through, seemingly oblivious to the damaging consequences it may have on the economy and job market. A recent survey conducted by the Institute of Directors paints a worrying picture of how business leaders view the bill. Of the 500 directors surveyed, a staggering 72% believe that this new legislation will further damage economic growth that has already been under severe pressure due to recent political and economic turbulence. Nearly half of those surveyed, 49%, say they would be less likely to hire new staff if the bill comes into force. This is a clear indicator that the bill could stifle employment opportunities at a time when many sectors are still recovering from the effects of the pandemic and Brexit. Adding to concerns, 36% of respondents said they would be more likely to outsource jobs overseas, a move that could lead to further job losses domestically and weaken the UK's industrial base. Furthermore, 23% of business leaders admitted that redundancies are now more likely to be on the horizon due to the bill. This figure alone should alarm policymakers who champion workers' rights but must also consider the practical realities businesses face. Perhaps most striking is the response from 52% of the surveyed directors, who plan to increase their investment in automation and AI technologies. While technological advancement is inevitable and can bring efficiencies, this shift underscores a darker truth: companies are preparing to replace human jobs with machines rather than risk the new liabilities and restrictions that the bill imposes on employers. This could accelerate job losses in sectors reliant on manual labor and routine tasks, leaving many workers vulnerable. Behind these troubling figures lies a clear political motivation. The bill appears to prioritize keeping trade unions satisfied, often at the expense of business sustainability. The unions, unsurprisingly, have thrown their full support behind the legislation. Labour's close relationship with the unions is well known, and critics argue that this bill is more about securing union backing and funding than balancing the needs of businesses and employees. This dynamic raises pressing questions about Labour's priorities. While protecting workers' rights is essential, doing so at the cost of business confidence and job creation risks harming the very people the party claims to support. Without thriving businesses to provide jobs and economic growth, workers may ultimately lose out. Many employers see this bill as a direct attack on their ability to operate competitively and efficiently in an already challenging economic environment. The message is clear: the government risks driving businesses, and the jobs they provide, out of the country. With the UK economy facing uncertainties from inflation, global supply chain issues, and geopolitical tensions, now is hardly the time to add new burdens on companies struggling to recover. Labour's insistence on pushing this bill despite widespread opposition from business leaders reflects a troubling disconnect between policy and economic realities. This approach may alienate entrepreneurs and investors, both crucial for creating the jobs and growth Britain desperately needs. The future of UK employment and economic health may hinge on whether policymakers listen to these warnings. If the bill proceeds unchanged, many fear it will hasten business closures, increase unemployment, and push the UK further behind other economies. It remains to be seen whether Labour will reconsider its stance or double down on a policy that some view as an existential threat to British business. In summary, Rachel Rayner's employment rights bill is being met with fierce resistance from the business community. The evidence from the Institute of Directors survey is clear: the bill risks stalling economic growth, discouraging hiring, encouraging outsourcing, increasing redundancies, and accelerating automation. At a time when the UK economy needs support and stability, this legislation threatens to do the opposite. Unless Labour reconsiders its position, the consequences for business and workers alike could be dire. Certainly. Here's an expanded continuation of the news article covering the issue in greater detail. The consequences of Rachel Rayner's employment rights bill extend far beyond mere statistics and surveys. They represent a fundamental shift in how businesses will be expected to operate in the UK. For many small and medium-sized enterprises, SMEs, which form the backbone of the British economy, the bill threatens to introduce a layer of complexity and cost that could prove insurmountable. Unlike large corporations that may have the resources to absorb increased regulatory burdens, SMEs operate on tighter margins and with less financial cushion. The added costs and restrictions could push many to downsize or close altogether, compounding unemployment and economic stagnation. Business leaders have voiced their concerns repeatedly, warning that the bill's provisions around employment rights, redundancy protections, and dispute resolution mechanisms create an environment where employers feel more like adversaries than partners. The risk of increased litigation and higher severance liabilities could lead employers to become more cautious, curbing hiring or even opting to outsource jobs where labor laws are less stringent. Moreover, this bill arrives at a time when UK businesses are already grappling with significant external pressures. The aftershocks of Brexit have disrupted supply chains, increased costs, and created labor shortages in key sectors such as agriculture, hospitality, and manufacturing. The COVID-19 pandemic's economic impact has not fully dissipated, leaving many companies struggling to regain footing. Inflationary pressures and rising energy costs further strain profitability. To layer on a stringent employment bill now risks tipping many businesses over the edge. It's also important to consider the broader macroeconomic implications. With business investment threatened, the UK risks falling behind other advanced economies that are innovating and expanding. Foreign investors who once saw the UK as a competitive hub might look elsewhere if they perceive a hostile regulatory environment. This could lead to a vicious cycle where reduced investment leads to slower growth, which in turn discourages further investment. The push for greater automation and artificial intelligence adoption, as indicated by over half of surveyed directors, is a direct response to the anticipated increased costs and risks of employing human workers under the new bill. While automation can improve productivity, it also threatens to displace workers, particularly in routine and lower-skilled roles. Without sufficient retraining programs or social safety nets, many workers could find themselves out of jobs with limited prospects for re-employment. Critics argue that Labour's legislation is a political gambit designed to placate union leaders and secure vital election funding. Historically, unions have been instrumental in Labour's electoral success, and maintaining their support remains a top priority for party leadership. However, this alignment risks alienating a wider constituency of business owners, workers, and entrepreneurs who may view the bill as an overreach that undermines economic vitality. The tension between protecting workers and fostering a conducive environment for business is a delicate balance. Labour's challenge is to demonstrate that it can defend employment rights without stifling growth and innovation. However, as the bill currently stands, many believe the scales tip heavily in favour of union demands at the expense of pragmatic economic policy. From a worker's perspective, the bill promises stronger protections, fairer treatment, and potentially better working conditions. These are laudable goals and reflect legitimate concerns over precarious employment and exploitation. Yet, the debate must consider the unintended consequences of such protections. If businesses respond by cutting jobs, reducing hiring, or relocating, workers may face fewer opportunities overall. The government and Labour leadership must engage in genuine dialogue with business representatives, unions, and economic experts to refine the bill. Creating a framework that balances fairness with flexibility is essential. This could include phased implementation, exemptions for SMEs, enhanced retraining programs, and measures to encourage investment in human capital alongside technological innovation. Public opinion also plays a crucial role. Many voters support strong workers' rights but may not fully grasp the economic trade-offs involved. Clear communication about the bill's potential impacts, and the government's plans to mitigate negative effects, will be vital to maintain public trust. Looking ahead, the legislative process will be closely watched by all stakeholders. Amendments and negotiations could shape the final form of the Employment Rights Bill, determining whether it becomes a tool for growth and fairness or a catalyst for economic decline. The UK's economic future hangs in the balance. With rising unemployment fears and business leaders sounding the alarm, the question remains whether Labour can find a path that supports workers without killing the very businesses that provide jobs and prosperity. Failure to do so risks long-term damage that will affect communities, families, and the nation's standing on the global stage. In conclusion, Rachel Rayner's Employment Rights Bill represents a pivotal moment in UK economic and labour policy. Its current trajectory alarms business leaders and risks unintended negative consequences on employment and growth. Balancing workers' rights with economic realities is no easy task, but it is imperative for the government to act wisely. The stakes are high, and the coming months will determine whether the UK moves towards a sustainable future or faces deeper economic challenges born from well-intentioned but misguided legislation. Certainly. Here's a rephrased and condensed version of the news article that presents the same key information and arguments but in a different tone and structure. Business leaders warn Labour's employment bill could cripple UK economy. A proposed employment rights bill, championed by Labour's Rachel Rayner, is drawing sharp criticism from the UK business community, which fears it could derail economic recovery and accelerate job losses. Critics argue the bill imposes rigid regulations that risk driving employers out of the country, reducing job creation, and pushing firms toward automation and outsourcing. A recent survey by the Institute of Directors offers a stark warning. 72% of business leaders believe the bill would harm economic growth, while nearly half said they would be less likely to hire new staff. Over a third indicated they might outsource jobs overseas, and almost a quarter admitted redundancies would be more likely if the bill becomes law. Automation also looms large in business planning, with 52% of directors saying they would boost investment in AI and robotics to avoid the new costs and liabilities tied to hiring. While tech investment is often seen as progress, in this context it signals a retreat from human employment, especially in sectors dependent on manual labor. The bill's strongest support comes from trade unions, which have long been aligned with Labour. This has led to accusations that the legislation prioritizes union interests over economic pragmatism, potentially undermining business sustainability at a critical time. Small and medium-sized enterprises, already facing headwinds from Brexit, COVID-19 recovery challenges, inflation, and global instability, could bear the brunt. Unlike larger corporations, many SMEs lack the resources to absorb the additional regulatory burden, making downsizing or closure more likely. Foreign investors, once drawn to the UK for its flexible labour market, may begin to look elsewhere if the country adopts what some describe as hostile business legislation. The cumulative effect could be stagnating growth and rising unemployment. Although the bill aims to strengthen protections for workers, such as redundancy rights and fairer dispute processes, it may backfire if businesses respond by cutting jobs or relocating. Striking the right balance between worker protections and business viability is crucial, yet many fear Labour's current approach leans too far toward rigid regulation. Experts urge Labour to consult with business leaders and economists to revise the legislation before it passes. Suggestions include phased implementation, targeted support for SMEs, and complementary investment in retraining and upskilling workers displaced by automation. The stakes are high. As Britain seeks to rebuild its economy, the Employment Rights Bill has become a lightning rod for broader concerns about political priorities and economic strategy. Whether Labour listens to business leaders or presses ahead unchanged will have lasting consequences for jobs, growth, and the UK's competitiveness on the global stage. The air in the UK's boardrooms is thick with apprehension. A legislative storm, brewing under the banner of Labour's proposed Employment Rights Bill, championed by Rachel Rayner, threatens to unleash a torrent of unintended consequences, according to a chorus of business leaders. Far from offering a pathway to prosperity, this bill is increasingly viewed as a potential straitjacket for economic recovery, a catalyst for job losses, and a deterrent to the very growth the nation desperately needs. The alarm bells are ringing across the business community, from sprawling multinational corporations to the nimble backbone of the economy, small and medium-sized enterprises, SMEs, all fearing that this legislation could cripple the UK economy at a fragile moment. The core of the apprehension lies in the bill's perceived rigidity. Critics contend that the proposed regulations are too prescriptive, too burdensome, and fundamentally misunderstanding the delicate balance required for a thriving, dynamic labour market. The fear is palpable. These stringent new rules could compel employers to consider drastic measures, including scaling back operations, diverting investment away from the UK, and, in a particularly worrying trend, accelerating the shift towards automation and outsourcing. The very sectors that have historically provided significant employment, particularly those reliant on manual labour, are seen as being most vulnerable to these transformative pressures. The Institute of Directors, IOD, a venerable voice of the UK's business leadership, recently amplified these concerns with a stark, quantitative warning. Their comprehensive survey paints a grim picture of anticipated outcomes should the bill become law. A staggering 72% of business leaders surveyed expressed a firm belief that the proposed legislation would actively harm economic growth. This is not merely a pessimistic outlook, it represents a significant majority of those at the helm of economic activity predicting a detrimental impact on the nation's financial health. Adding to this bleak forecast, nearly half of the respondents unequivocally stated that they would be less likely to hire new staff under the new regulations. This reluctance to expand workforces directly contradicts the national imperative to boost employment and reduce post-pandemic economic scarring. Perhaps most concerning are the potential consequences for existing jobs. Over a third of the business leaders surveyed indicated that they might be compelled to outsource jobs overseas. This is a chilling prospect, suggesting a potential exodus of employment opportunities from the UK, as companies seek more flexible and less costly labour markets elsewhere. Furthermore, almost a quarter of directors admitted that redundancies would become a more likely scenario if the bill passes in its current form. This direct link between proposed legislation and potential job cuts is a powerful indictment, suggesting that a bill ostensibly designed to protect workers could paradoxically lead to their displacement. The shadow of automation looms large over these discussions, not as a sign of progress in this context, but as a strategic retreat from human employment. The IOD survey revealed that a striking 52% of directors stated they would boost investment in artificial intelligence, AI, and robotics to mitigate the new costs and liabilities associated with hiring human workers. While technological advancement is generally lauded, here it represents a defensive maneuver. Businesses, facing increased regulatory burdens and associated costs for human labor, are signaling a clear intent to substitute human workers with machines. This shift would be particularly devastating for sectors heavily reliant on manual labor, where the cost of human employment directly impacts competitiveness. The long-term implications are profound: a potential acceleration of job displacement, particularly for those in lower-skilled positions, and a further widening of the skills gap, as the demand for AI and robotics specialists rises while opportunities for manual labor diminish. The bill's staunchest advocates are, predictably, the trade unions. Their long-standing alignment with labor has led to accusations that this legislation is less about holistic economic strategy and more about prioritizing specific union interests, potentially at the expense of broader business sustainability. Critics argue that in a critical economic juncture, when flexibility and adaptability are paramount, such legislation could inadvertently undermine the very businesses that create jobs and drive growth. The concern is that the bill represents a political concession rather than a pragmatic economic solution, potentially creating an imbalance that could prove detrimental to the UK's competitive edge. The economic headwinds already buffeting small and medium-sized enterprises, SMEs, make the prospect of this bill particularly alarming. These vital cogs in the economic machine have been weathering a perfect storm of challenges: the lingering effects of Brexit, the arduous path to recovery from the COVID-19 pandemic, persistent inflationary pressures, and the unpredictable instability of the global economic landscape. Unlike their larger corporate counterparts, many SMEs simply lack the extensive resources, the dedicated legal teams, and the financial buffers to absorb significant additional regulatory burdens. For these businesses, already operating on tighter margins and with leaner operational structures, the increased compliance costs, potential legal liabilities, and administrative overheads could prove to be the breaking point. The stark reality is that for many SMEs, the choice might not be between adapting and thriving, but between downsizing their workforce or, in the most severe cases, outright closure. This would not only devastate individual livelihoods but also hollow out the local economies that SMEs disproportionately support. The UK's historical appeal to foreign investors has, in part, been predicated on its reputation for a relatively flexible labour market. This has been a significant competitive advantage, drawing in capital and fostering job creation. However, a seismic shift is feared if the proposed employment rights bill becomes law. Many international observers and potential investors may perceive the UK as adopting what some are already labelling as hostile business legislation. This perception, coupled with increased labour costs and regulatory complexities, could prompt foreign direct investment to dry up, or worse, to be diverted to other nations perceived as more business-friendly. Backfire. These include a phased implementation of the new regulations, allowing businesses time to adapt and adjust to the new landscape rather than facing an immediate and potentially overwhelming burden. Targeted support for SMEs is another critical recommendation, acknowledging their unique vulnerabilities and providing tailored assistance to help them navigate the changes without resorting to drastic measures. Furthermore, experts advocate for complementary investment in retraining and upskilling workers, particularly those who might be displaced by the accelerating trend towards automation. Such proactive measures could mitigate the negative impacts of technological shifts and ensure that the workforce is equipped for the jobs of the future, rather than simply reacting to job losses. The current debate surrounding the Employment Rights Bill has become a lightning rod for broader concerns about Labour's economic strategy and its overall political priorities. As Britain endeavours to rebuild its economy in the wake of significant global challenges, the path it chooses on labour market regulation will have profound and lasting consequences. Whether Labour demonstrates a willingness to genuinely listen to the concerns of business leaders and adapt its legislative approach, or presses ahead with the bill unchanged,